Okay, so today we're going deep on CBOs.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got this really interesting training guide from the Southern Africa Litigation Center. Have
Okay.
you heard of them?
I have, yeah. They do some great work.
Yeah. And this one's all about capacity strengthening, but we're going to kind of zoom in on one specific part of it,
Right.
which is governance.
Yes.
And I think that's something that, a lot of people maybe haven't thought about too deeply when it comes to CBO. So we're gonna unpack that today.
Sounds good.
So what is good governance?
Well, I think, a lot of people think, oh, you just, get a board of directors and that's good governance. But it's so much more than that.
Right.
It's really about making sure that you have the structures and the processes in place so that your board can be effective.
So it's not just about having a board. It's about making sure the board can actually function.
Exactly. And the training really emphasizes that because you're going to face challenges, right? Every organization does.
Every single one.
And so it's about, being able to adapt and overcome those challenges.
Like good governance helps with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's say I care about a particular CBO or I'm thinking about supporting one.
Yeah.
Why should I care about governance?
Well, I think, if you care about the mission of the organization, then you should care about governance because good governance is what enables the organization to achieve its mission.
So it's directly tied to impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you think about it from a donor's perspective, donors want to know that their money is being used effectively.
Right.
And that the organization is being run well. And that's what good governance is all about.
So it's about accountability.
Yes, accountability, transparency, all of those things.
Okay, so this training guide has some really interesting points. I was going through it and I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to hit the highlights. But, one of the things that they talk about is, getting board members who are passionate about the mission.
Yes.
Yeah, it kind of seems obvious, but
Yeah, you'd think so.
why is that so important?
Well, if you're not passionate about the work, then you're not going to be as committed to it.
Right.
And you're probably going to burn out pretty quickly.
Especially because board members a lot of times are volunteers, right?
Exactly. They're giving their time and energy for free, so they really need to believe in what the organization is doing.
Yeah, passion is the fuel.
Absolutely.
Okay, so another thing that the training talks about is board induction.
Yes.
And what is that?
So that's basically onboarding your board members, making sure that they understand their roles and responsibilities, how the board operates,
Yeah.
All of the basic stuff.
So it's not just like, hey, welcome to the board, good luck.
No, definitely not. It's a process, and it's important to have a good induction process because it sets the board up for success.
So that they can actually hit the ground running.
Exactly.
Okay, this one was interesting to me. Term limits.
Yeah.
So the training suggests 3-year terms with a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. So you can be on the board for 6 years total.
Yeah.
But then you have to take a break.
Right.
Why is that a good idea?
Well, I think, one of the benefits of term limits is that it brings in fresh perspectives.
So new ideas.
Yeah, new people, new ideas, and it also prevents any one person from having too much power for too long.
So it's like checks and balances.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you do lose some institutional knowledge when people leave.
Right.
So it's a trade-off.
So how do you balance that?
Yeah.
How does a CBO figure out what's the right term limit for them?
Well, I think it depends on the organization, the size of the board, the complexity of the work.
So there's not a one-size-fits-all.
Right. But it's important to have a policy in place.
All right. Another thing that the training emphasizes is a conflict of interest policy.
Yes.
And again, that seems like a no-brainer. But,
Yeah.
Why is it so important to actually have that written down and in place?
Well, because it protects the organization. It ensures that decisions are being made in the best interests of the organization and not for personal gain.
Right, right.
So, for example, if a board member has a financial interest in a company that the organization is doing business with.
Ooh, yeah, that's
a conflict of interest.
That's a problem.
Yeah, and so having a policy in place helps to prevent those kinds of situations.
So it's about transparency and building trust.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've talked about, passionate people, board induction, term limits, conflict of interest. What else is in this training guide?
Well, another important element is financial transparency.
Oh, yeah.
Making sure that the organization's finances are in order and that there's clear reporting.
And that's where having a good treasurer comes in.
Absolutely. The treasurer is a key role on the board.
Yeah.
They're responsible for overseeing the organization's finances.
Making sure everything's on the up and up.
Exactly.
Okay. Last point that I wanted to highlight is that the training talks about providing support for board members.
Yes.
Especially if they have to travel for meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, seems like a small thing, but
Yeah.
why is that important?
Well, it shows that you value your board members, that you appreciate their time and their commitment.
And it makes it easier for them to participate.
Exactly. Especially if they're volunteers, you want to make sure that they're not out of pocket for their expenses.
Right.
So it's a small thing, but it can make a big difference.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive into CBO governance, what's one key takeaway that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the main takeaway is that good governance is essential for any CBO that wants to be successful. It's the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, it's not just a nice to have, it's a need to have.
Exactly.
And so if you're involved with a CBO or if you're thinking about supporting one, I would encourage you to ask about their governance practices.
Yeah, find out what their policies are. Do they have a conflict of interest policy? Do they have term limits for board members?
Are they transparent about their finances?
Exactly. All of those things are important, and they're a sign of a well-run organization.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really insightful conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all of our listeners out there, keep up the great work and keep those CBOs strong.